Dear students, I hope you remember the last class we have dealt with the extracranial complications of chronic suppurative otitis media. Today, I would like to take up the intracranial complications of chronic suppurative otitis media. Even in these days of antibiotics, intracranial complications are of a grave nature if they occur. They carry almost about 40% mortality. So it is of paramount importance for all the treating physicians to have a detailed view of the intracranial complications, how do they occur, how they should be recognized and managed in time. And the first and foremost intracranial complication is an extradural abscess. Extradural abscess, as the word implies, it is outside the dura. See, this is the brain and this is the dura mater. You know very well, brain is covered by dura mater, pia mater and arachnoid matter, very, very thin membrane. So, pus collects between the bone, cranium and the dura. That is why it's called extradural abscess. So, it may be situated anywhere. See, this is the tegmen. That is the thin plate of bone that separates the middle ear cavity from the intracranium. So, suppose there is a breach by, say, about cholesteatoma. There is an opening here. The infection can readily access the intracranium and produce an extradural abscess. In the same way, if this bone, this is called lateral sinus, otherwise known as sigmoid sinus. So the sigmoid sinus, the bone that covers the sigmoid sinus, which we can see in the mastoidectomy operation at the end, is called the sinus plate. Sinus plate is the bone that overlays the sigmoid sinus. Now, the extradural abscess can also occur at this particular place. That means between this bone and the dura of the lateral sinus. This is also an extradural abscess. This is otherwise known as perisinus abscess. This is a very important complication of chronic suppurative otitis media, rather neglected chronic suppurative otitis media. And of course, very rarely it can occur in acute otitis media also, especially in children. Just to recall, the infection inside the middle ear cavity can extend medially into the labyrinth through oval window, round window, lateral semicircular canal also, and can produce meningitis. If the infection extends above superiorly, that means into the middle cranial fossa, it may even produce an abscess in the temporal lobe. Occasionally, it may produce meningitis too. And if the infection extends posteriorly into the posterior cranial fossa, it can produce an extradural abscess, as I mentioned just now, or lateral sinus thrombosis, which we are going to deal with in detail now, and posterior fossa meningitis, or a cerebral abscess. If the infection extends down, it can produce jugular vein thrombosis. Now, what is the pathology of extradural abscess? The pathology of extradural abscess is of two varieties. First and foremost, if it occurs as a result of acute suppurative otitis media, it is because of the hyperemic decalcification of the bone. As a part of the hyperemia, which is part and parcel of the inflammation that produces destruction and decalcification of the bone, the infection can readily access the intracranium. More commonly, chronic suppurative otitis media along with cholesteatoma, which readily destroys bone, that produces infection entering into the extradural space. And Not but not the least, by venous thrombophlebitis also, this extradural abscess can occur. Even though the bone is intact, there is no destruction of bone, still an extradural abscess can occur just because of the venous thrombophlebitis. Now, how do we recognize? Very surprisingly, this extradural abscess is silent. When we operate on this patient, especially the chronic suppurative arteritis media patients, just without our effort, sometimes the sinus plate gets breached, and we will surprised to see pus coming out from that breach, from that opening. That means it's a case of extradural abscess, otherwise perisinus abscess, as I told you. In the same way, if the bone, let me go back. This is what I'm mentioning. During surgery, if there is an opening here, there will be pus coming out from here. This is perisinus abscess. Perisinus abscess is nothing but an extradural abscess occurring just by the side of the lateral sinus. In the same way, during mastectomy, if you injure the tegmen, then you may find pus coming out from here. This is also a silent abscess. That is why in good olden days, invariably during mastectomy, we open a piece of bone here so that we will not miss any extradural abscess and a perisinus abscess. If it is symptomatic, it will produce pain, dull pain, and of course there may be fever and there may be discharge. The discharge may be pulsatile, pulsating each time. This is called reservoir sign. That is, if you remove the pus by means of dry mopping or by means of suction clearance, immediately it forms, it's called reservoir sign positive. That means there must be a reservoir, a pocket of pus somewhere else. In the same way, there may be headache. Now, how do we confirm or rule out? Thanks for this modern imageology. We can have a CT scan either with contrast or without contrast. We can have an MRI with contrast or without contrast. They can readily demonstrate the extradural abscess. Seeing is believing. Once you open the mastoid and open the extradural space, as I told just now, we can confirm the presence or absence of the abscess. How do we treat? Treatment is, once you suspect it, hospitalize the patient, give him a full course of antibiotic, and do a cortical mastectomy if it is secondary to acute suppurative arteritis media, and if it is secondary to chronic suppurative arteritis media and cholesteatoma, you have to do a modified radical mastectomy. Invariably, the prognosis is very good. Next complication is subdural abscess. What is subdural abscess? Subdural abscess is collection of pus between dura and arachnoid. You can see this picture. See, this is the cranial cavity, cranium, and this is the dura. This is the dura covering the brain. Now, the collection of pus between the dura and the arachnoid, which is present on the pyometer. Pyometer is the cover of the brain that immediately overlies the brain matter, whereas arachnoid is a very thin layer of cover that is present over the pyometer. Now, over the arachnoid, you have got the dura. So, in between the dura and the arachnoid, this is subdural abscess. Now, how do we recognize this? The symptomatology may be because of the meningeal irritation, or it may be cortical venous thrombophlebitis, or because of the raised intracranial tension. Suppose there is meningeal irritation, patient will be irritable, patient will be complaining of headache, and there may be fever, and there may be vomiting also, and there will be malaise. In the same way, if there is cortical venous thrombophlebitis, once again there will be fever, and patient will be having headache, and he will have the sense of not doing well, that is malaise and all. And if there is raised intracranial tension, patient will have projectile vomiting. What is projectile vomiting? Generally, a vomiting is preceded by nausea. If the vomiting is not preceded by nausea, it is called projectile vomiting. It is a part and parcel as a clinching feature of raised intracranial tension. Patient will be sleeping, and suddenly, without any effort, suddenly he threw out. That is projectile vomiting. So, what are the other features of raised intracranial tension? Papilledema, projectile vomiting, and headache. These three are the cardinal signs of raised intracranial tension. Apart from that, there may be cranial involvement because of the raised intracranial tension. Generally, it is the sixth nerve that gets involved very easily when there is a raised intracranial tension. Why sixth nerve? Sixth nerve is the, or abducens nerve is the nerve which has got the longest intracranial course. So for any pathology, you will get involvement of the sixth nerve, that is the abducens nerve. That's why they call this as a very poor localizing site. Anywhere it can get involved. What is the other occasion where the sixth nerve is involved? That is the Petrus apicitis or the Gradinego syndrome, where the sixth nerve is involved in the Doralow's canal at the Petrus apex. Now, how do we treat? Let us consider this particular condition as a neurological emergency. Luckily, let me tell you, this complication is very rare. I remember I have seen only one patient in the entire career of mine, and this condition has got a very poor prognosis unless it is recognized very early, unless it is treated on war footing. Emergency craniotomy is done, or burr holes are made, and the pus is drained. The patient may not survive. And remember, you should never do a lumbar puncture in a case of subdural abscess just because of the raised intracranial tension. Patient may cone to death. You know what is coning? What is coning? Coning is suddenly if the pressure in the intracranium is released, say by means of a lumbar puncture, the cerebellum, especially the tonsil of the cerebellum, will herniate into the foramen magnum, and patient may die because of the respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. So it is mandatory whenever there is raised intracranial tension, one should think twice before doing a lumbar puncture, especially if the raised intracranial tension is because of a mass lesion like a tumor and an abscess and so on. You should never do it. The next complication is meningitis. Meningitis is because of the inflammation or infection occurring in the cerebrospinal fluid in the subarachnoid space. Once again, the dura is the outermost layer, next is the arachnoid, next is the pia mater. So in between pia mater and the arachnoid mater, if the CSF is always there, so the CSF, it catches the infection, then it will be a case of meningitis. Meningitis is the most common complication of otitis media. And about 1/3 case of meningitis, they are associated with complications, other complications of the intracranial. And in case of children, it may be bloodborne, but in adults, it is invariably because of the chronic suppurative otitis media, autogenic meningitis. And there may be very high fever, there will be very severe headache, and there will be irritability, and there may be nausea and vomiting, and patient will be drowsy. There may be cranial palsies, and rarely there may be hemiplegia also. So how do we suspect or confirm the meningitis? By neck rigidity. You allow the patient to lie down on a couch and neck rigidity, that is, you flex the neck. Normally, an individual should touch the chin with the sternum. So even meningitis patient cannot touch the sternum with his chin. So this is called Kernig sign. What is Brudzinski sign? Oh, sorry. This is neck rigidity. Kernig sign is you make the patient lie down on the couch and ask the patient to stretch the legs. Now you flex the hip joint and gently you try to extend the knee. Now there will be severe pain. This is Kernig sign positive. The Brudzinski sign is if you try to flex the neck, then immediately the hip joint also will go into flexion. These two signs are their characteristic features of the meningitis. Now, this is very, very important, very easy, very important. Whenever you suspect a intracranial complication of the chronic suppurative otitis media, immediately you have to hospitalize the patient and start a temperature chart. If patient gets severe spikes like this is called picket fence fever, high peaks, then you have to suspect what is known as lateral sinus thrombophlebitis. If the patient is having a remittent fever, that means the spikes are not too high, then we can suspect what is known as an autogenic meningitis. If the fever is subnormal throughout, then you have to suspect a brain abscess. Even though this is very, very old tradition, still it is very valid. It gives very important conclusions, and it is very easy. Now, how do we treat? What are the bacteria that is involved? All the bacteria, common bacteria, that is Strepto, Staphylo, Pneumococci, Pseudomonas, E. coli, and other gram-negative organisms, bacteroids, they are also very commonly involved. So it is best to have a cultural sensitivity of the discharge and give a specific antibiotics in full dose, parental antibiotics by intravenous route. Now, once patient is admitted in the hospital, then you have to get a CT scan and MRI done and confirm that there are no other intracranial complications except meningitis. Generally, meningitis is associated with other intracranial complications also. And now, if there is no raised intracranial pressure, you can do a lumbar puncture. What do you do with lumbar puncture? By lumbar puncture, you can confirm or rule out meningitis. How? If you collect the cerebrospinal fluid and analyze it, you see high neutrophil count. It is diagnostic of bacterial meningitis. And there will be, of course, the the sugars will be low and protein will be high. And if you can also culture the cerebrospinal fluid, like you culture the blood. And if there is fever is very high in meningitis, during spikes of fever, you can culture the blood also, so that you can know the offending organism and suitable antibiotic. So once you know the specific antibiotic, you can give a full course of the antibiotic in the parental form along with steroid. Why do we use steroid? Steroid will reduce the sequelae, neurological sequelae. Not only neurological sequelae, audiological complications. What are the audiological complications? I already mentioned in my last class. Meningitis is a speech and hearing emergency also. Not only is it a life-threatening problem, it is also a speech and hearing emergency. If you concentrate only on saving the life of the individual and forget about this, patient may become severely deaf, and if the patient is a child, he may become a dumb and he will develop mental retardation and so on. Why? Because the meningitis produces what is known as labyrinthitis ossificans. The entire bony labyrinth will be replaced, membranous labyrinth is replaced by bone. Unless we recognize early and do a cochlear implantation, patient may not recover his hearing. Of course, needless to say, we have to do a mastectomy once patient general condition permits. Next complication is brain abscess. Brain abscess occurs in about 50% of the adults. Rather, the autogenic nature or autogenic origin of the brain abscess is in about 50% cases of adults, it is there. Whereas in children, 25% of brain abscess are autogenic. Now, it is more common in the cerebral, that is brain, rather than cerebellum, 2 times more common. And the spread is, in case of brain, it is either direct because of the breach in the bone, or it may be retrograde thrombophlebitis. In the same way, in the case of cerebellum, the infection directly enters the cerebellum by Trotman's triangle. What is Trotman's triangle? Trotman's triangle is the triangle formed by lateral sinus posteriorly, superiorly the superficial petrosal sinus, anteriorly the labyrinth and the facial nerve. Let me repeat. Posteriorly it is the lateral sinus, superiorly it is the superficial petrosal sinus, anteriorly labyrinth and the facial nerve. This particular area is called the Trotman's triangle. If you open the Trotman's triangle, you will be directly in the posterior fossa. So through Trotman's triangle, the infection extends and a cerebral abscess, cerebellar abscess results. Or it may result because of the retrograde thrombophlebitis also. Now, what is the pathology of a brain abscess? First and foremost, once infection enters the brain, there may be encephalitis, there will be inflammation. Patient will not be having any symptoms except mild malaise, and there may be slight headache. In this particular stage, if we recognize and treat, patient will improve like anything. Now, if you neglect it, he will go in for next stage, that is stage of localization. This also lasts for several weeks, and during this particular phase also, patient will have mild fever, headache. If in a known case of chronic suppurative otitis media with cholesteatoma, if individual feels malaise and mild headache and slight fever, you have to recognize, you have to suspect and do everything to rule out an intracranial complication like brain abscess. Now, these are the days of MRI. Very easily one can suspect and confirm or rule out the brain abscess, either with MRI with contrast or without contrast. If you leave at this stage, then patient will develop this particular stage of complication, that is frank abscess formation. What is an abscess? Abscess is collection of pus cells. What is a pus cell? It is nothing but a dead neutrophil along with the bacteria. So there will be formation of pus surrounded by a zone of edema. You will find very classically the abscess in the MRI or even in the CT scan. Now, if we neglect at this stage, next is the termination. That is, the abscess slowly disappears. Sometimes the abscess may suddenly burst open into one of the lateral ventricles and it may produce a very fatal result. Patient may die. So the clinical features include, the clinical features may be either because of the raised intracranial tension or because of the localized signs. Raised intracranial tension is characterized by projectile vomitings, headache and fever, papilledema, and localized signs. That is, if the abscess is in the temporal lobe, there will be symptoms and signs of temporal lobe syndrome, or if there is an abscess in the cerebellum, it is cerebellar syndrome, cerebellar lesion, symptoms and signs of cerebellar lesions. Now, an abscess is there in the temporal lobe, then what happens? Patient will have nominal aphasia. What is nominal aphasia? Patient will be able to know the use of that particular thing, but he cannot remember the name. Say for instance, if you show him this particular thing, he will know it carries water, we can drink it, it is very common thing, but he doesn't know the name of the object, that is a bottle. That bottle word he will not be able to mention. This is called nominal aphasia. And next thing is homonymous hemianopia. What is homonymous hemianopia? Homonymous hemianopia means half of the field of the vision is lost. Homonymous, that is on the same side. Now, it is done by confrontation test. I hope you remember what is confrontation test. It must have taught in physiology to all of you. The examiner sit in front of the patient and he will ask the patient to see his finger, and he will move up and down and sideways. This is to test his visual fields. So patient is having hemianopia, means half of the field will be missing for the patient. There may be contralateral motor perisys because the temporal lobe will be compressing on the motor area of the parietal cortex. Patient will have motor paralysis. And if the uncinate gyrus is involved, patient may throw an epileptic fit. Patient may also suffer from pupillary changes and ocular motor palsy because of the transtentorial herniation. Coming to the cerebellar abscess, the symptoms and signs of cerebellar abscess we all know, that is dysdiadochokinesis. That is, patient will not be able to do alternate pronation and supination. And the finger nose test will be positive. That means finger nose test, patient will not be able to do finger nose test. This is finger nose incoordination. There will be past pointing. If you ask the individual to do the finger nose test, he will not be able to touch the nose like this. He will be, in each attempt, he will go to the extreme. This is finger nose incoordination. And then there may be what is known as coarse tremor. There will be tremor. The tremor is coarse and it is intention tremor, in contrast to the extrapyramidal lesions. In extrapyramidal lesions, in contrast to the fine tremor. Now, In case of Parkinsonism, it is tremor at rest, whereas in case of cerebellar lesion, it is intention tremor. He will not have any tremor if he is normal. If he tries to say lift the hand like this, he will start the tremor. This is intention tremor. And very classically, there will be staccato speech. In case of cerebellar lesion, there is what is known as staccato speech. He will speak in each syllable. I will come and do the operation, like that. That means each syllable you will be uttering. This is staccato speech, which is characteristic of cerebellar lesion. If you subject the individual, you can see the abscess proper. This is the abscess in the temporal lobe of the brain, whereas this is the abscess in the cerebellum. Now, how do we manage? First of all, confirm the abscess by doing a CT scan and MRI. The lumbar puncture is mentioned, but it should be done with great care. Better to avoid it. Some people do a guarded lumbar puncture. Better to avoid it because this is a mass lesion, and antibiotics should be started immediately. And if there is deterioration of the patient, we have to subject the individual for surgery. Surgery is neurosurgery. That is, you do a craniotomy and aspirate the pus. And if possible, with the extended craniotomy, identify the whole abscess and excise in toto. Or you can incise the abscess and drain it. And it is mandatory, once the patient general condition improves, has to be subjected for mastoidectomy. Otherwise, the condition might recur. Next complication is lateral sinus thrombosis, otherwise known as sigmoid sinus thrombosis. Very, very important complication we come across because of the neglected chronic suppurative aortic media or neglected acute suppurative aortic media in children. Now, what will happen in case of lateral sinus thrombosis? In lateral sinus thrombosis, there may be a formation of a perisinus abscess, as I mentioned just now. And because there is inflammation of the sinus wall, that is endophlebitis, there may be formation of a mural thrombus inside the sinus. Once the thrombus increases, let us go back again. Yeah. Now, this is the sinus, that is lateral sinus or sigmoid sinus. So, once there is lateral sinus thrombosis, as I have mentioned, there may be perisinus abscess, and once there is endophlebitis, there will be formation of a thrombus. Once the thrombus increases in size, it will obliterate the entire sinus. That means the blood that it's supposed to drain from the brain is stopped here. That means it will be obliterating the sigmoid sinus. And if it is allowed to progress, it may extend. It may extend superiorly and extend into transverse sinus and torcula, that is confluence of sinuses inside the brain, or it may extend downwards up to the jugular bulb and interjugular vein below. Generally, it extends up to the junction of another vein. Now, what are the characteristic features of lateral sinus thrombosis? First and foremost is pick and fence fever. As I mentioned just now, there will be high peaks of severe fever with chills and rigors at some time or other in a day, just like mimicking a malaria fever. So there will be fever with chills and rigors, and there will be headache. As there is thrombosis, collection of thrombus inside, patient may have anemia and septicemia, and some amount of emaciation also will be there. Once there is sepsis somewhere in the body, patient will not thrive. So in case of children especially, there will be absence of failure of thriving. They will not grow. And there will be what is known as Greisinger's sign. That is, there will be edema at the level of the foramen for mastoid emissary vein. That is just behind the mastoid process. This is Greisinger's sign. And of course, if you do an ophthalmoscopic examination, there will be papillary edema. And if you do a Dobby-Ayer test, it will be positive. That is, Dobby-Ayer test is, if you do a lumbar puncture, during lumbar puncture, if you drain the CSF drop by drop, if you apply pressure on the jugular vein, automatically the pressure is carried and into the brain, and the CSF starts flowing fast. This is normal. But if there is thrombosis of the lateral sinus, the pressure is not carried inside. So there will not be any change in the flow of the CSF. This is characteristic feature of lateral sinus thrombosis. Let me repeat. In normal conditions, during the lumbar puncture, the CSF flows drop by drop. At that time, if you apply digital pressure over the jugular vein, the pressure is carried into the lateral sinus, through that into the various venous sinus of the brain. So once there is positive pressure, there will be more flow of CSF because of this particular pressure. But if there is a thrombus in the lateral sinus, even to apply digital pressure, there will not be any change in the CSF flow. Next is the Crowey-Back test. What is Crowey-Back test? Once again, if you do a fundoscopy and examine the veins of the retina, if you apply digital pressure during that process, the veins will engorge. Why? Because of the pressure carried out in the retrograde fashion. Once there is a thrombus which blocks the lateral sinus, this pressure is not carried inside and the engorgement of the veins will not be there. And last but not the least, there may be tenderness of the jugular vein. Now, what investigations you do? First and foremost is you take a blood smear and examine to rule out the malarial parasite. Who knows? You may be dealing with a case of malaria. And then you have to send the blood for culture and sensitivity so that we can know the right organism and right antibiotic. And you can do a lumbar puncture and do a CSF analysis to rule out the meningitis. If you take an X-ray of the mastoid, then you'll see evidence of cholesteatoma and evidence of infection. And in case of CT scan or an MRI, very, very characteristic see the delta sign. That is a triangular shadow with a radiolucent center and a surrounding edematous area. This is delta sign, characteristic feature of the lateral sinus thrombosis in case of CT scan with contrast, and MR with contrast. If you want to know the progress of the disease, you have to do MR venogram, where you can study whether disease is extending or relapsing or subsiding. If you neglect, patient will go in for septicemia and pyemia. Patient may develop meningitis or a brain abscess, or you may be developing other complications like say subdural abscess, extradural abscess, and brain and things like that. And he may also develop intrajugular vein thrombosis, or he may develop the cavernous sinus thrombosis, which is very, very fatal. What are the characteristics of cavernous sinus thrombosis? There will be chemosis, that is edema of the conjunctiva, and there will be external ophthalmoplegia. Patient will not be able to move his eyes. It's very fatal even today if it occurs. And last but not least is the otitic hydrocephalus. What is otitic hydrocephalus? We will deal with now. Now, the treatment is, once again, once you recognize, you have to do a lateral sinus thrombosis. You have to do give a specific antibiotic intravenous for a long period. Once patient's condition improves, you have to subject the patient for mastectomy. The last complication is otitic hydrocephalus. The word hydrocephalus here is a misnomer, because in hydrocephalus there will be engorgement of the ventricles. Large ventricle will be there. Here you will not have large ventricles. The ventricles are rather smaller. That is why we call it as a misnomer. This condition is similar to benign intracranial hypertension, BIH. And there is one condition called pseudotumor cerebri. Pseudotumor cerebri, that is very classically described secondary to vitamin A toxicity. So pseudotumor cerebri, otitic hydrocephalus, benign intracranial hypertension, all the three diseases, all the three names, they denote only one classical pathological entity. Coming back to otitic hydrocephalus, how does it affect? Now, the lateral sinus thrombosis, which we have dealt just now, if it obstructs the venous return, then there will be increased pressure over the venous sinuses, and the intracranial pressure itself raises, producing this particular picture. In the same way, if the thrombosis of the lateral sinus extends above up to the, say, superior sagittal sinus, then what happens? The arachnoid villi in the superior sagittal sinus region, they fail to absorb the cerebrospinal fluid that is formed in the brain. As a result, there will be accumulation of CSF, and this particular otitic hydrocephalus results. Now, the clinical feature consists of headache, and there may be diplopia. Already I mentioned there will be involvement of the cranial nerves in case of raised intracranial tension, especially the sixth nerve. Sixth nerve supplies what? It supplies the lateral rectus. And once there is paralysis of lateral rectus, there will be diplopia. And there will be blurring of vision because of the papilledema. The papilledema maybe about 5 or 6 diopters, and there may be nystagmus because of the raised intracranial tension. Once you suspect the condition, there is no mass lesion, you can do a lumbar puncture. Very classically, you do a lumbar puncture and attached to a manometer, the pressure may be raised up to 300 millimeters sometimes. Now, the treatment is you do a therapeutic LP now. Once you confirm the diagnosis, you do a therapeutic LP, that is the treating physician or a surgeon will remove about 15 or 20 cc of cerebrospinal fluid so that the pressure is relieved. And then you can prescribe estazolamide. Is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. So if you give estazolamide, the production of cerebrospinal fluid will be decreased. And if the patient doesn't respond, then you have to do what is known as a thecoperitoneal shunt from the spinal cord to the gemin, the subdural space in the spinal cord up to the peritoneum. A shunt will be introduced and there will be pressure will be reduced. And once the condition improves, you have to treat the ear condition by mastectomy. Thank you.